the first verse. Samuel said to Saul, God sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now listen again to what God says. This is the God of the angel army speaking. I'm about to get even with Amalek for ambushing Israel when Israel came up out of Egypt. Here's what you're to do. Go to war against Amalek. Put everything connected with Amalek under a holy ban and no exceptions. This is to be total destruction. Men and women, children and infants. That's terrible. Cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys, the works. Saul called the army together at Telaim and prepared them to go to war. 200 companies of infantry from Israel and another 10 companies from Judah. Saul marched to Amalek city and hid in the canyon. Then Saul got word to the Kenites, get out of here while you can. Evacuate the city right now or you'll be lumped in with the Amalekites. I'm warning you because you showed real kindness to the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. And they did. The Kenites evacuated the place. Then Saul went after Amalek from the canyon all the way to Shur near the Egyptian border. He captured Agag, king of Amalek, alive. Everyone else was killed under the terms of the holy band. Saul and the army made an exception for Agag and for the choice sheep and cattle. They didn't include them under the terms of the holy band, but all the rest, which nobody wanted anyway, they destroyed as decreed by the holy band. Then God spoke to Samuel, I'm sorry I ever made Saul king. He turned his back on me. He refuses to do what I tell him. Saul was angry when he heard this. He prayed his anger and disappointment all through the night. He got up early in the morning to confront Saul, but was told, Saul's gone. He went to Carmel to set up a victory monument in his own honor, and then was headed for Gilgal. By the time Samuel caught up with him, Saul had just finished an act of worship, having used Amalekite plunder for the burnt offerings sacrificed to God. As Samuel came close, Saul called out, God's blessings on you. I accomplished God's plan to the letter. Samuel said, so what is this I'm hearing? The bleating of sheep, this mooing of cattle. Only some Amalekite loot, said Saul. The soldiers saved back a few of the choice cattle and sheep to offer up in sacrifice to God. But everything else we destroyed under the holy band. Enough, interrupted Samuel. Let me tell you what God told me last night. Saul said, go ahead, tell me. And Samuel told him, when you started out in this, you were nothing and you knew it. Then God put you at the head of Israel and made you king over Israel. Then God sent you off to do a job for him, ordering you, go and put those sinners, the Amalekites, under a holy ban. Go to war against them until you've totally wiped them out. So why did you not obey God? Why did you grab all this loot? Why, with God's eyes on you all the time, did you brazenly carry out this evil? Saul defended himself. What are you talking about? I did obey God. I did the job God set for me. I brought in King Agag and destroyed the Amalekites under the terms of the holy band. You're just not listening. You're just not getting it, are you, Saul? So the soldiers saved back a few choice sheep and cattle from the holy band for sacrifice to God at Gilgal. What's wrong with that? You just don't get it, do you? That's why you lost the kingdom. Then Samuel said, do you think all God wants are sacrifices, empty rituals just for show? He wants you to listen to him. Plain listening is the thing, not staging a lavish religious production. Not doing what God tells you is far worse than fooling around in the occult. Getting self-important around God is far worse than making deals with your dead ancestors. Because you said no to God's command, he says no to your kingship. Saul gave in and confessed, I've sinned, I've trampled roughshod over God's word and your instructions. You must have split personalities or something. 1 minute you're defending yourself, now you're falling out. I care more about pleasing the people. I let them tell me what to do. Oh, absolve me of my sin. Take my hand and lead me to the altar so I can worship God. This is the king talking? This is a fool. This is a nut. But Samuel refused. No, I can't come alongside you in this. You rejected God's command. Now God has rejected you as king over Israel. As Samuel turned to leave, Saul grabbed at his priestly robe and a piece tore off. Samuel said, God has just now torn the kingdom from you and handed it over to your neighbor, a better man than you are. Israel, God's God of glory, doesn't deceive and he doesn't dither. He says what he means and he means what he says. Saul tried again. I have sinned, but don't abandon me. Support me with your presence before the leaders and the people. Come alongside me as I go back to worship God. Samuel did. He went back with him, and Saul dropped to his knees before God and worshiped. Then Samuel said, present King Agag of Amalek to me. Agag came dragging his feet, muttering that he'd be better off dead. Samuel said, just as your sword made many women childless, so your mother will be childless among those women. And Samuel cut Agag down in the presence of God right there in Gilgal. Samuel left immediately for Ramah, and Saul went home to Gibeah. Samuel had nothing to do with Saul from then on, though he grieved long and deeply over him. But God was sorry he had ever made Saul king in the first place. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. God looks into the heart. God addressed Samuel. So how long are you going to mope over Saul? You know I've rejected him as king over Israel Fill your flask with anointing oil and get going. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've spotted the very king I want among his sons. I can't do that, said Samuel. Saul will hear about it and kill me. God said, take a heifer with you and announce. Mercy, Jesus. God said, take a heifer with you and announce I've come to lead you, Lord have mercy, in worship of God with this heifer as a sacrifice. Make sure Jesse gets invited. I'll let you know what to do next. I'll point out the one you are to anoint. Lord have mercy. Take a heifer with you. Verse 4, Samuel did what God told him. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the town fathers greeted him, but apprehensively. Is there something wrong? Nothing's wrong. I've come to sacrifice this heifer and lead you in the worship of God. Lord have mercy. Prepare yourselves, be consecrated, and join me in worship. He made sure Jesse and his sons were also consecrated and called to worship. When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, here he is, God's anointed. But God told Samuel, looks aren't everything. Don't be impressed with his looks and stature. I've already eliminated him. God judges persons differently than humans do. Men and women look at the face. God looks into the heart. Jesse then called up Abinadab and presented him to Samuel. Samuel said, this man isn't God's choice either. Next, Jesse presented Shammah. Samuel said, no, this man isn't either. Jesse presented his 7 sons to Samuel. Samuel was blunt with Jesse. God hasn't chosen any of these. Then he asked Jesse, is this it? Are there no more sons? Well, yes, there's the runt, but he's out tending the sheep. Samuel ordered Jesse, go get him. We're not moving from this spot until he's here. Jesse sent for him. He was brought in, the very picture of health, bright-eyed, good-looking. God said, up on your feet, anoint him. This is the one. Samuel took his flask of oil and anointed him with his brothers standing around watching. Uh-oh, that's trouble right there. That is trouble right there. The Spirit of God entered David like a rush of wind, God vitally empowering him for the rest of his life. Samuel left and went home to Ramah. David, an excellent musician. At that very moment, the Spirit of God left Saul, and in its place, a black mood sent by God settled on him. He was terrified. Saul's advisor said, this awful, tormenting depression from God is making your life miserable. Oh, Master, let us help. Let us look for someone who can play the harp. When the black mood from God moves in, he'll play his music and you'll feel better. Saul told his servants, go ahead, find me someone who can play well and bring him to me. One of the young men spoke up. I know someone. I've seen him myself, the son of Jesse of Bethlehem, an excellent musician. He's also courageous of age, well-spoken and good-looking, and God is with him. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse requesting, send your son David to me, the one who tends the sheep. Jesse took a donkey, loaded it with a couple of loaves of bread, a flask of wine, and a young goat, and sent his son David with it to Saul. David came to Saul and stood before him. Saul liked him immediately and made him his right-hand man. Saul sent word back to Jesse, thank you. David will stay here. He's just the one I was looking for. I'm very impressed by him. After that, whenever the bad depression from God tormented Saul, David got out his harp and played. That would calm Saul down and he would feel better as the moodiness lifted. 1 Samuel chapter 17, Goliath. The Philistines drew up their troops for battle. They deployed them at Soko in Judah and set up camp between Soko and Azekah at Ephes Dammim. Saul and the Israelites came together, camped at Oak Valley, and spread out their troops in battle, readiness for the Philistines. The Philistines were on one hill, the Israelites on the opposing hill, with the valley between them. A giant nearly 10 feet tall stepped out from the Philistine line into the open, Goliath from Gath. He had a bronze helmet on his head and was dressed in armor, 126 pounds of it. He wore bronze shin guards and carried a bronze sword. His spear was like a fence rail. The spear tip alone weighed over 15 pounds. His shield bearer walked ahead of him. Goliath stood there and called out to the Israelites' troops, why bother using your whole army? Am I not Philistine enough for you? And you're all committed to Saul, aren't you? So pick your best fighter and pit him against me. If he gets the upper hand and kills me, the Philistines will become your slaves. But if I get the upper hand and kill him, you'll all become our slaves in service. I challenge the troops of Israel this day. Give me a man. Let us fight it out together. When Saul and his troops heard the Philistines' challenge, they were terrified and lost all hope. Enter David. He was the son of Jesse the Ephrathite from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse, the father of 8 sons, was himself too old to join Saul's army. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war. The names of the 3 sons who had joined up with Saul were Eliab, the firstborn, next Abinadab, third Shammah. David was the youngest. While his 3 oldest brothers went to war with Saul, David went back and forth from attending to Saul to tending his father's sheep in Bethlehem. Each morning and evening for 40 days, Goliath took his stand and made his speech. One day Jesse told David his son, take this sack of cracked wheat and these 10 loaves of bread and run them down to your brothers in the camp. And take these 10 wedges of cheese to the captain of their division. Check in on your brothers to see whether they're getting along all right and let me know how they're doing. Saul and your brothers and all the Israelites in their war with the Philistines in the Oak Valley. David was up at the crack of dawn and having arranged for someone to tend his flock, took the food and was on his way just as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp as the army was moving into battle formation, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines moved into position, facing each other, battle ready. David left his bundles of food in the care of a sentry, ran to the troops who were deployed, and greeted his brothers. Now, see, that's a problem. You shouldn't have left your assignment. While they were talking together, the Philistine champion, Goliath of Gath, stepped out from the front lines of the Philistines and gave his usual challenge. David heard him. The Israelites, to a man, fell back the moment they saw the giant, totally frightened. The talk among the troops was, have you ever seen anything like this? This man openly and defiantly challenging Israel. The man who kills the giant will have it made. The king will give him a huge reward, offer his daughter as a bride, and give his entire family a free ride, 5 smooth stones. David, who was talking to the men standing around him, asked, what's in it for the man who kills the Philistine and gets rid of this ugly blot on Israel's honor? Who does he think he is anyway, this uncircumcised Philistine, taunting the armies of God alive? They told him what everyone was saying about what the king would do for the man who killed the Philistine. Eliab, his older brother, heard David fraternizing with the men and lost his temper. What are you doing here? Why aren't you minding your own business, tending that scrawny flock of sheep? I know what you're up to. You've come down here to see the sights, hoping for a ringside seat at a bloody battle. What is it with you? David replied. All it did was ask a question. Ignoring his brother, he returned to someone else, asked the same question, and got the same answer as before. The things David was saying were picked up and reported to Saul. Saul sent for him. Master, said David, don't give up hope. I'm ready to go and fight this Philistine. Saul answered David, you can't go and fight this Philistine. You're too young and inexperienced. And he's been at this fighting business since before you were born. David said, I've been a shepherd tending sheep for my father. Whenever a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I'd go after it, knock it down, and rescue the lamb. If it turned on me, I'd grab it by the throat, wring its neck, and kill it. Lion or bear, it made no difference. I killed it, and I'll do the same to this Philistine pig who is taunting the troops of God alive. God, who delivered me from the teeth of the lion and the claws of the bear, will deliver me from this Philistine. Saul said, go, and God help you. Then Saul outfitted David as a soldier in armor. He put his bronze helmet on his head and belted his sword on him over the armor. David tried to walk, but he could hardly budge. David told Saul, I can't even move with all this stuff on me. I'm not used to this. And he took it all off. Then David took his shepherd's staff, selected 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the pocket of his shepherd's pack with his sling on his hand, approached Goliath. As the Philistine paced back and forth, his shield bearer in front of him, he noticed David. He took one look down on him and sneered, a mere boy, apple cheek and peach fuzz. This Philistine ridiculed David. Am I a dog that you come after me with a stick? And he cursed him by his gods. Come on, said the Philistine, I'll make a roadkill of you for the buzzards. I'll turn you into a tasty morsel for the field mice. David answered, you come to me with sword and spear and battle axe. I come at you in the name of God of the angel armies, the God of Israel's troops, whom you curse and mock. This very day, God is handing you over to me. I'm about to kill you, cut off your head, and serve up your body and the bodies of the Philistine buddies to the crows and the coyotes. David was something else. I'm about to kill you. The whole earth will know that there's an extraordinary God in Israel, and everyone gathered here will learn that God doesn't save by means of sword or spear. The battle belongs to God. He's handing you to us on a platter. That roused the Philistine, and he started toward David. David took off from the front line, running toward the Philistine. David reached into his pocket for a stone, slung it, and hit the Philistine hard in the forehead, embedding the stone deeply. The Philistine crashed face down in the dirt. That's how David beat the Philistine, with a sling and a stone. He hit him and killed him. No sword for David. Then David ran up to the Philistine and stood over him, pulled the giant sword from its sheath, and finished the job by cutting off his head. When the Philistines saw that their great champion was dead, they scattered, running for their lives. The men of Israel and Judah were up on their feet shouting. They chased the Philistines all the way to the outskirts of Gath and the gates of Ekron. Wounded Philistines were strewn along the Sharim road all the way to Gath and Ekron. After chasing the Philistines, the Israelites came back and looted their camp. David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but the giant's weapons he placed in his own tent. When Saul saw David go out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Tell me about this young man's family." Abner said, "For the life of me, O king, I don't know." The king said, "Well, find out the lineage of this raw youth." As soon as David came back from killing the Philistine, Abner brought him the Philistine's head still in his hand straight to Saul. Saul asked him, "Young man, whose son are you?" "I'm the son of your servant Jesse," said David, "the one who lives in Bethlehem." "You should know who I am. I'm the one that's been playing that music while you've been in them deep black moods. 1 Samuel chapter 18, Jonathan and David, soul friends. By the time David had finished reporting to Saul, Jonathan was deeply impressed with David. An immediate bond was forged between them. He became totally committed to David. From that point on, he would be David's number one advocate and friend. Saul received David into his own household that day. No more return to the home of his father. Jonathan, out of his deep love for David, made a covenant with him. He formalized it with solemn gifts, his own royal robe and weapons, armor, sword, bow, and belt. Whatever Saul gave David to do, he did it and did it well. So well that Saul put him in charge of his military operations. Everybody, both the people in general and Saul's servants, approved of and admired David's leadership. David, the name on everyone's lips. As they returned home after David had killed the Philistine, the women poured out all the villages of Israel, singing and dancing, welcoming King Saul with tambourines, festive songs and lutes, and playful frolic. The women sang, "Saul kills by the 1,000, David by the 10,000. Now see, you're wrong there. David should have stopped that, put that to a stop. Now that's a part of the problem. And they're stirring up strife in the nation. This made Saul angry, very angry, I bet it did. He took it as a personal insult, which it was. He said, "They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Before you know it, they'll be giving him the kingdom." From that moment on, Saul kept his eye on David, and David could have stopped that. The next day, an ugly mood was sent by God to afflict Saul, who became quite beside himself, raving. David played his harp as he usually did at such times. Saul had a spear in his hand. Suddenly, Saul threw the spear, thinking, "I'll nail David to the wall." David ducked, and the spear missed. This happened twice. Now Saul feared David. It was clear that God was with David and had left Saul. So Saul got David out of his sight by making him an officer in the army. David was in combat frequently. Everything David did turned out well. Yes, God was with him. As Saul saw David becoming more successful, he grew more fearful. He could see the handwriting on the wall. But everyone else in Israel and Judah loved David. They loved watching him in action. One day Saul said to David, "Here is Merab, my oldest daughter. I want to give her to you as your wife. Be brave and bold for my sake. Fight God's battles." But all the time Saul was thinking, the Philistines will kill him for me. I won't have to lift a hand against him. David, embarrassed, answered, "Do you really mean that? I'm from a family of nobodies. I can't be son-in-law to the king." The wedding day was set, but as the time neared for Merab and David to be married, Saul reneged and married his daughter off to Adriel the Maholathite. Meanwhile, Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David. It's like a gossip section. When Saul was told of this, he rubbed his hands in anticipation. Second chance. I'll use Michal as bait to get David out where the Philistines will make short work of him. So again, he said to David, "You're going to be my son-in-law." Saul ordered his servants, "Get David off by himself and tell him, the king is very taken with you and everyone at court loves you. Go ahead and become the king's son-in-law." The king's servants told all this to David, but David held back. "What are you thinking of? I can't do that. I'm a nobody. I have nothing to offer." When the servants reported David's response to Saul, he told them to tell David this: "The king isn't expecting any money from you, only this. Go kill 100 Philistines and bring evidence of your vengeance on the king's behalf. Avenge the king on his enemies." Saul expected David to be killed in action. On receiving this message, David was pleased. There was something he could do for the king that would qualify him to be his son-in-law. I guess David was kind of naive. He lost no time, but went right out. He and his men killed 100 Philistines, brought their evidence back in a sack, and counted it out before the king. Mission accomplished. Saul gave Michal, his daughter, to David in marriage. As Saul more and more realized that God was with David and how much his own daughter Michal loved him, his fear of David increased and settled into hate. Saul hated David. Whenever the Philistine warlords came out to battle, David was there to meet them and beat them, upstaging Saul's men. David's name was on everyone's lips. 1 Samuel chapter 19, the black mood of Saul. Saul called his son Jonathan together with his servants and ordered them to kill David. But because Jonathan treasured David, he went and warned him. "My father is looking for a way to kill you. Here's what you are to do. Tomorrow morning, hide and stay hidden. I'll go out with my father into the field where you're hiding. I'll talk about you with my father, and we'll see what he says, and I'll report back to you. Jonathan brought up David with his father, speaking well of him. Please, he said to his father, don't attack David. He hasn't wronged you, has he? And just look at all the good he's done. He's put his life on the line when he killed the Philistine. What a great victory God gave Israel that day. You were there, you saw it, and were on your feet applauding with everyone else. So why would you even think of sinning against an innocent person, killing David for no reason whatever? Saul listened to Jonathan and said, you're right. As God lives, David lives. He will not be killed. Jonathan sent for David and reported to him everything that was said. Then he brought David back to Saul, and everything was as it was before. War broke out again, and David went out to fight the Philistines. He beat them badly, and they ran for their lives. But then a black mood from God settled over Saul and took control of him. He was sitting at home, his spear in his hand, and David was playing music. Suddenly, Saul tried to skewer David with his spear, but David ducked. The spear stuck in the wall, and David got away. It was night. Saul sent men to David's house to stake it out then first thing in the morning to kill him. But Michal, David's wife, told him what was going on. Quickly now, make your escape tonight. If not, you'll be dead by morning. She let him out of a window, and he made his escape. Then Michal took a dummy god and put it in the bed, placed a wig of goat's hair on its head, and threw a quilt over it. When Saul's men arrived to get David, she said, he's sick in bed. Saul sent his men back, ordering them, bring him, bed and all, so I can kill him. When the men entered the room, all they found in the bed was the dummy god with his goat's hair wig. Saul stormed at Michal. How could you play tricks on me like this? You sided with my enemy, and now he's gotten away. Michal said, he threatened me. He said, help me out of here or I'll kill you. David made good his escape and went to Samuel at Ramah and told him everything Saul had done. Then he and Samuel withdrew to the privacy of Naioth. Saul was told, David at Naioth in Ramah. David's there at Ramah. He immediately sent his men to capture him. They saw a band of prophets prophesying with Samuel, presiding over them. Before they knew it, the Spirit of God was on them too, and they were ranting and raving right along with the prophets. That was reported back to Saul, and he dispatched more men. They too were soon prophesying. So Saul tried a third set of men, and they ended up mindlessly raving as well. Fed up, Saul went to Ramah himself. He came to the big cistern at Siku and inquired, where are David and Samuel? Samuel and David, rather. A bystander said, over at Naiah in Ramah. As he headed out for Naiah and Ramah, the Spirit of God was on him too. All the way to Naiah, he was caught up in a babbling trance. He ripped off his clothes and lay there rambling gibberish before Samuel for a day and night, stretched out naked. People are still talking about it. Saul among the prophets? Who would have guessed? This is the word of the Lord.